Do you know who's buried beneath this church? No, not Caesar, although that would be pretty cool. It's Pompey the Great. And if you don't know his story, it's time we fix that. Welcome to Facts and History. So let's travel back to the year 106 BC. Rome is at war with the Mediterranean, or really just one part of it, called the First Mithridatic War. Rome has a big army, but there's one guy who stands out from all the rest. His name is Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, better known as Pompey the Great. He was born into a wealthy Roman family in 135 BC, but unlike most of his aristocratic counterparts, he wanted more than just the pleasures of life that his money could buy. He wanted power, and as we mentioned, Rome was at war. So first he headed to the front lines to get some military experience. He served under the great General Sulla during the First Mithridatic War, and after getting some victories under his belt, he was sent back to Rome to help put down a slave revolt. That was in 87 BC, but by 82, he was back on the battlefield fighting for Sulla once again. By the end of the war, his enemies thought he'd had enough of Rome for a while and would never return. But they were wrong. When Sulla marched on Rome in 88 BC, he took control of the city and established a new constitution. Among other things, it gave the Senate the power to appoint, not elect, consuls. This meant the Roman Republic's most powerful office could now be filled by people with no real claim to represent the people. Not surprisingly, the Roman people were not happy about this. So when Sulla fell ill and died soon after, Pompey returned to Rome and took advantage of the chaos to seize power. He was only 43 years old. Now, the Senate didn't like that he had taken control of Rome without their approval, so they refused to declare him dictator, which was essentially a puppet ruler. But they did allow him sole command of the legions and the authority to name his own officers. Basically, they hoped he'd go away and leave them alone. And that's exactly what he did. Pompey set sail for the east, where the Roman army was still fighting against King Mithridates, the sixth of Pontus. Most of the generals appointed by the Senate were bums, and the army hadn't seen a victory in years. But Pompey changed all that. In 85 BC, he crushed Mithridates' forces at the Battle of the Chalus River, and 3 years later, he entered the city of Athens to the cheers of thousands of liberated Greek slaves. Soon, all of the eastern Mediterranean would be under his control. But while Pompey was busy acquiring glory in the east, Rome was having some problems. In particular, a civil war was brewing between the Marian and Sullan factions. You see, those two groups had very different ideas about how Rome should be governed. The Marian faction wanted the lower classes to have more power, while the Sullan faction preferred things the way they were. Well, eventually, the fighting broke out. So Pompey returned to Rome to settle things once and for all. He easily defeated the Marian forces and went back on his word by executing many of his former allies. Then he went back on his word again by executing many of his former enemies, too. Okay, maybe he wasn't so good at keeping his word. But anyway, by 61 BC, he was officially the most powerful man in Rome. Yet despite his fame, fortune and power, Pompey made some serious blunders. For starters, he pissed off the Egyptian pharaoh by taking his lover. Then he went to war with the Roman Senate by ignoring their declarations of war against the kingdom of Pontus. To make matters worse, he alienated Julius Caesar, a man whose friendship he desperately needed. You see, Caesar had been granted control of the Gallic provinces, but when his term was up, he wanted to return to Rome and take on more power. But Pompey didn't want that. He feared Caesar would become too powerful. So he went to the Senate and got them to pass a law that forced Caesar to give up his command and return to Italy. This didn't sit well with Caesar, to put it mildly. He delayed his return for a few years, then crossed the Rubicon River with an army and marched on Rome. As soon as Pompey heard about this, he fled to the east to get support, except he never got there. On September 29, 48 BC, he was stabbed to death by a group of senators in the theater of Pompey. His head and hands were cut off and displayed throughout Rome. Caesar had avenged his honor and the Roman Republic was finished. For more on the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, stay tuned.